be here today. My name is Jason Kelley. I'm the Wheat and Feed Grains Extension Agronomist at the University of Arkansas. And before I forget, before we get going, if you got cell phones, go ahead and put them on silent. I guess I better do the same thing, hadn't I? I told somebody that the other day and then mine went off. But we're going to tag team this, myself and then Joey Branch is a crop consultant that we partnered up with, and so hopefully we can stay on time. This is a new talk for me, a new talk for Joey, and a different time, so we'll see if we can't get through it. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about management practices for high yielding corn. And corn, the last several years, especially in the Delta, we've planted a lot more corn. Really, since about 2007, our corn acreage has went up quite a little bit. And this is the average yields. This is across Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. It's since 1990 to 2017. Lots of ups and downs through there. 1998 wasn't a very good year. 2010 or 11 wasn't a very good year, but really the last 5 or 6 years we've had some really good yields. And so if you look at that average, if you plug in where we started, 90 bushel roughly on average all the way up till 2017, close to 180. Pencil that out, close to 3 bushel per year increase. So we're doing a lot of things right. Our hybrids have improved. We're better managers. We've got irrigation that probably takes out a lot of those ups and downs compared to a lot of the other areas. So a lot of numbers here, maybe a little bit harder to see, but I had the same data from the Delta region, also plotted the U.S. yields here in red. So if you look at the Delta average, it goes up. The U.S. average, there for a long time we were behind the U.S. average, but now, really thanks to the last 5, 6, 7 years, we're above the trend line average compared to the U.S. So U.S. yields over that same period increasing about 2 bushel per year, and like I say, the irrigation is probably what really helps us. 2012 was a really bad year for the Midwest. Really low yield, relatively low yields. It was a good year for us, so that irrigation really helped us. So what increases our yields? And so you guys go to a lot of these meetings, myself included, wanting to hear what really increases yields. And to me, I've been in this position since 2003, and we went through a lot of things, and we'll hit on some of these topics today. But to me, the big thing is weather. I've had done the exact same thing one year and made 250 bushel corn. The next year do the exact same thing, same hybrid, and make 40 bushel less. So there's lots of things we can do. And so today I'm going to want to talk a little bit about planting date, population, emergence, and then we have one trial we want to talk about a little bit about, what I call the kitchen sinks, to really see what increased yields and what we can do in coming years to help out our yields. So first thing I want to cover is a little bit about planting date. And it seems like this is a project that has been funded through our promotion board for previous years. And there's lots of good things about planting early. And in general, I want to plant early, but I don't have to be the earliest one to plant corn. And so, I think in general, probably higher yields, fewer expenses. In dry years, definitely less irrigation, less foliar diseases. Where we're planting refuge corn or non-BT corn, I think our corn borer impact is going to be less. Earlier harvest, better dry down potentially. So a lot of positives there. So one downside that I've seen in the past, and we'll look at some data here in a little bit, ultra early planting sometimes works out great. To me, it all revolves around stands. So if you don't get that optimum stand planting ultra early, you're probably not going to make that optimum yield that you're really looking for. And so we've done a lot of planting date studies, and like I say, this is some work that we've done in Arkansas, Marianna, Arkansas, from 2008 to 2015. A lot of different planting dates. We had some as early as March 6th, and kind of for reference, At this location, our last frost is typically about the 20th to 25th of March, somewhere in that time frame. So we got guys from Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee. It's a large variation here in the audience, but kind of for reference, March 20th, that would be kind of our last frost. And so if you look here, each bar represents about 7 different hybrids in any given planting date, and this is our relative yield. So, you know, we had variation in total bushels per acre. I mean, in these trials, we had some made 200, we had some 190, we had some 250. So we do a percentage of yield to kind of normalize things here. And so if you look here in March, you know, not always the highest yield, but you know, you get this curve here, and like I said, there's some variation here. But in Arkansas, this was irrigated. You know, I felt like in this trial, this location, we had probably about 6 weeks in there where we could maximize yield. And so I don't want to plant right ahead of a big rain. You know, it always seems like we're trying to get things dry and get it planted before the rain comes. But, you know, big rains right after, to me, really hurt us sometimes, especially when we get that stand. So, but if I can get the stand, I'd rather plant early than late. There's more of a yield penalty planting late than there probably is planting early, provided we get the stand. And, you know, temperatures probably are really the big driving reason why, if you look at why these yields drop off. And so June, July temperatures are really important for us during grain fill. And so if you go back and looked at our high yields for the Delta during the 2014 season, that was the year we had our highest yields. You know, we had really cool temperatures over a big region. I think that really helped us out, you know, not just during pollination, but really the whole grain field. So we had everything in place up front. We got good weather during grain field, and that's really what helped us get those yields up there. And so if you look at that kind of a March planting versus, say, the end of the planting season, you know, we got about 6, 7, 8 weeks in there that are really important. And so March, you know, this is our high and low average temperatures at Marianna over a 30-year period. Well, if you plant it in March, you know, you're looking at this green box as our time frame for grain fill. And so, yes, typically we're finishing grain fill at probably the hottest time of the year, whereas we plant in March, pretty much all of the grain fill is during that warm typical season. Now, we can be cool in there, we can have some differences, but on average, that's one of the reasons why our yields go down with later plantings. So in summary, you know, the planting dates, you know, not all our yields don't always come from the earliest planting. Sometimes they do, but if we get good stands, I think we can have some really good yields planted a little bit later than what we typically want to. You know, the thing that I don't like seeing is the poor stands with those ultra early plantings, and sometimes we can look at the weather and see what that 7-day forecast is going to bring. Sometimes the weatherman throws us loops, and you know, it looks like a good pattern, and then all of a sudden it's not. So, but I think the early planting is beneficial, especially when we get into summers where it turns off hot right quick. All right, so other things I get a lot of questions on in here lately, plant populations. And you know, it seems like plant population is one of the things that everybody's really looking at here the last couple of years. And you know, this is some data we had. This is kind of a normalized, and this is an average of several hybrids, and I'll show you the average versus some data from this past year. But typically on our corn production, somewhere around 32, 33, 34,000 plants per acre is where our yields are maximized. And this is some data we had from a few years ago. This is 38-inch rows, furrow irrigated. But you know, you look at the seed cost up here, these numbers up above, that's kind of what we're looking at in cost. So somebody asked me what the optimum plant population is, not knowing what hybrid it is. You know, I'm going to kind of fall back on what some of these averages are. So averages are what? You know, an average. It doesn't really show the highs and lows. And so we've had some data this past year and really the last 3 years, 2 or 3 years, looking at how some of these hybrids respond to plant population. This is just one trial. 2017 38-inch rows, had 8 hybrids over here, had 5 plant populations. So earlier I told you 34,000 is probably where we need to be. You know, if you look down here at these averages, well, that's probably somewhere in that range would be where most of the time you're going to maximize yield and probably more importantly profit. But there are some differences. Pioneer 2160, I could probably put Pioneer 2089 in there and get very similar responses. You know, if you look at that yield response over a wide range here for this hybrid, you know, not much of a response there, is there? If you go down here to this Dynagro, 252, 274, kind of flat lines. So, you know, there are some hybrids out there that do well at lower populations. This Terrell kind of the same way. Although in the opposite extreme, we got this DCAB 6772, 224, 243, you know, every time it stair-stepped up. So, you know, knowing what hybrid you have out there, and so if you're looking at 350 corn, trying to figure out where you can save, that maybe there's some instances where we might be able to cut back a little bit and not hurt our yields, you know, maybe make a little bit more profit. So there is some differences out there. You know, I hate the term fixed ear, flex ear, but I'm going to show you some differences. You know, sometimes I think it's really more of a sales pitch to say, well, you need to plant more seed of this particular hybrid, or really maybe less. And so this is out of the trial, I guess the previous year's trial, where we had some of these hybrids, this Pioneer 2160, Dynagro 57, VP 51. These two hybrids did well at low populations. If you look at the size of these ears, they're pretty large ears, so they really flexed out. You know, to me, if I had 25 or 30,000 out there, I'd probably get pretty close to maximum yields. These bottom two, this 6772, remember that was the one I told you that, you know, stair steps up every time we increase plant population. Not a whole lot of difference in these ear sizes. So, you know, this hybrid didn't look nearly as good at these lower populations. But, you know, if you were really pushing it, you know, 45,000, there wasn't a whole lot of difference there. So, you know, knowing what hybrid you got, how that hybrid is going to perform, how you're going to maximize the profit and yield potential out of these is pretty important to me. So, population is important. You know, we go to a lot of these meetings, we hear about how important it is to get everything spaced correctly, right? You've all heard that. I have as well. And this is a picture out of some of my plots last year, year before. You know, I was pretty happy with that. It had good spacing, good even height there. They all look like they're silking about the same time. You know, I really didn't do anything different compared to that one versus this one. And so, but taking the time to make sure you got the planter right, get the spacing right, get the depth right. In this instance, we had big rain right after. Had some emergence problems. I'm not so sure we didn't have some seed issues out there. Maybe a weak seed every now and then that gave us some problems. So what kind of yield loss do you think we would have saw with this here? You know, you go to a lot of these meetings and every little plant, you know, that it's probably not going to make a whole lot. And we followed some of these plants. We stuck flags out there, come back later in the season and pulled individual plants. So the normal emerging plants, or these larger ears, you know, 234 bushel, if we did an individual ear, which that doesn't necessarily tell you good representation of yield, but these smaller ears, late emerging ones, you know, they just didn't make much. But the thing of it was, you know, if you looked at that stand, well, it's pretty skippy and all that, you know, the whole field still made about 233 bushels. So these late emerging ones, yeah, they didn't look pretty. We did everything that we could really to get as uniform as we can. You know, I've had some guys say, well, I'm going to tear up a field because it's uneven. Well, you know, it really depends on how uneven it is, but you know, it has to be awfully uneven before I would actually do something. So look at the big picture. You know, if you got 90% plus all come up uniformly, I think you're in good shape there. So, you know, we touched on a little bit on planting dates, plant population, how things are going to go, you know, how uniform things are. What can we do to increase our yields to that next level? You know, like I say, the last 5 or 6 years our yields have really went up. Weather management and all that, good weather, good hybrids. So what do we need to do to get our yields up to the, you know, that magical number we're looking for? And so we had a set of trials over the last 5 years, and I call this my kitchen sink study, or really I wanted to see if I could grow 300 bushel corn. You know, we started this when corn was $6, $7 a bushel, so the economics really didn't matter. But to me, you know, this is still pretty good information that even though we had some really high inputs going into it, we really saw what impacted yield and what really didn't. And so we looked at a lot of variables out here. Deep tillage, not everybody does that or wants to do that. Had some in-furrow starter fertilizer, looked at plant populations. Seed insecticide, I've been to some meetings where people say that, you know, we're going to a higher seed insecticide rate. That might benefit us in some instances. Foliar fungicides, more fertilizer. So we looked at all these inputs individually to see what impact they had on yield. And then we put it all together in what I call a single treatment called the kitchen sink. And so we conducted these trials at 2 locations in Arkansas. Marianna, which is just southwest of here, basically across the river. I don't know, maybe it's 50 miles or so. And then at Rower in southeast Arkansas, a little bit further south. 38-inch rows, conventional tillage, raised beds, furrow irrigation. Pretty much a typical program for the Delta in that region. Looked at each year our hybrids varied a little bit. We had some Pioneer, Terrell, Dynagro, and Decab, depending on the year and location. So what we did here is, let me walk you through what we did here. This is our treatments over here, Marianna and Rower. And so our deep tillage, with deep tillage, a 5-year average here, these are 5-year averages, it gave us 3 bushel. At Rower, on average, we actually numerically went backwards. And then when we look at statistically different, out of the 9 trials where we had had deep tillage, 2 out of 9 provided a statistical difference. So 2 times out of 9 we got a response, basically. So that wasn't very good odds to me. And like I say, and these fields to me probably didn't really have a compaction issue. Although when you deep till it or put a flag in, you know, them big bicycle flags, you could hit a hard spot down there 6 or 8 inches. But with full irrigation, we just didn't see a whole lot. In-furrow starter fertilizer. We looked at this, had about 3 gallons of a commercial mix, a little bit of nitrogen, mainly phosphorus. 10 trial average, we got 3 bushel, 6 bushel. And 2 out of the 10 provided a statistical difference. So we had some confidence that we had some real differences there. You know, about every trial we had a growth difference, but in the end, the yield difference wasn't as much as what we hoped. Plant population, we looked at increasing the plant population quite a little bit compared to our normal versus one that was really probably, in my mind, too high. And some of the hybrids we had really weren't all that responsive. So 3 bushel, 2 bushel, but only 1 out of 10 provided us a difference. So not a lot of difference there. Seed insecticide, we looked at that for 3 years, I guess, didn't have it in the last 2 years. Gave us a pretty good numerical bump. Every time it was just slightly above our 250 level, Poncho 250 versus a 1250. None of them were statistically different, but there was usually a numerical response. Foliar fungicides, 2 bushel, 10 trial average. You know, we're planting it early. Mike, we've had these conversations before, whether to spray it or not. And, you know, if it's late planted, it probably makes sense. These were April planted generally. I think in most times we outran it, although at the end of the season they looked different. Oftentimes they didn't yield any different. So 2 out of 10 gave us a statistical difference, numerically a little bit of a bump. Additional fertilizer. You know, we used our normal recommendations, so our P and K was what the soil test called for. We put extra fertilizer in that, and like I say, hindsight, these are really high numbers, but I think it really goes to show that, You know, we put a lot of extra fertilizer out there and really didn't get a whole lot of response. And most of these responses, 3 out of 10, I think they all came from one location. So if you look at that, man, I'm not real convinced that I'm going to do any of these to increase my yield, are you? You're spending a lot of money there. So how did it look when we put all these inputs together? So basically, in this last line here, I call the kitchen sink, we did everything compared to our normal recommendations. So we got 28 extra bushel. And you try to add these up, it doesn't really come up, doesn't add up correctly probably, but on average, we got 28 bushel at Mariana, Rower 12 bushel. So in each of these locations, we generally had 2 hybrids. So 17 out of 19 combinations, it was quite a bit different. So why it was quite a bit different when all these individually didn't do a whole lot, that's what we're trying to figure out. So this is a project that we're still ongoing, and to me, I want to pull out some things and try to make this economical, that we can get maybe increase our yields a little bit and not spend a whole lot more money than what we need to. So in summary, what impacts corn yield? Gosh, it's a big factor for us is weather. Too hot, too wet. What is our, trying to figure out how you're going to increase corn yields. What is your limiting factor? And I think that's the hard part to figure out. And I think in these trials, and probably a lot of people in the Delta, it's drainage. I don't think it's water. I don't think it's lack of water. I think it's too much water in a lot of instances. It's not necessarily fertility and all this other stuff, but if drainage is holding us back a little bit, I really feel like that's probably our limiting factor. I know I was at one of these meetings a couple years ago, and one of these high yield guys was saying, or my counterpart in one of these states that the producers talk about these 400 or 500 bushel yields, and he said, if you got poor drainage, it's really hard to get above 250 bushel. And I think that's probably true. And on the trials we've done, and like I said, we're still tinkering with it. More inputs don't necessarily mean more yield, and definitely probably not going to mean more profit. The small details, being timely, those small things to me make a lot of difference. And the more I go through this, the longer I've been dealing with corn, I'm more and more convinced that yield potential is set when that planter leaves the field. You got the hybrid set, the field, the population, how it emerges, the whole slew of things that once it's planted, you aren't going to be able to correct. So I'm going to stop there, and like I say, I'm not sure how we got. I think we still got enough time here. Any questions before we get Joey up here?
What's your amount of nitrogen?
The nitrogen, I glazed over that. Most of these, our recommendation would be 220 units of nitrogen total. So when I showed that 10 bushel difference there, we were comparing about 220 versus, well over 300. So, our nitrogen recommendations are based on about 95% of our maximum yield. And that really comes out, you look at those 10 trial averages, it probably comes out pretty close. So we were comparing 220 roughly to over 300. All right.